In this lecture, I'm going to briefly go over how you would go about using Gutenberg without any tools or libraries. It's just going to be pure JavaScript. In the resource section of this lecture, I provide a link to the repository called Gutenberg Examples. This is the official repository for Gutenberg demo examples. It shows you how to build your own blocks for Gutenberg. The demos use some components that we haven't gone over yet, but a lot of it should make sense to you regardless. What I like about this repo is that there are two versions for each demo. There's the regular ES5 version, and then there's the ES6 version. Throughout this course, we've been using the ES6 version, meaning we've been using the command line, tools, and libraries to build our blocks. However, it's not necessary to use those tools. It's completely possible to create blocks using plain JavaScript. If you scroll down, you'll see that WordPress says the following. For each of the examples that include an ES6 example, the following commands are required to build the plugins. If you were to look into any of the ES6 folders, then you'll find some familiar files like the babelrc, webpack config, and package.json files. You'll more or less see some of the same code we've been using for our own blocks. Let's go back and check out the basic block. Right away, you'll notice that there is way less files than before. There should only be two, which are the index.php and block.js files. Let's start with the PHP file. Nothing significant going on here. All they're doing here is using the init hook to load the JavaScript file. Just like the ES6 version, a lot of the code is handled on the JavaScript side rather than the PHP side. Let's go back and check out the JS file now. Things are quite different here. In this version, the developers use a self-invoked function to contain everything. This step is optional, but it's recommended because it keeps things encapsulated and it allows you to grab certain properties from an object. If you look at the bottom, you'll see that the wp.blocks, wp.i18n, and wp.element objects are passed in. Then at the top, you'll see them referred to as blocks, i18n, and element. This is how you would have properties as their own variables. As you can see, it's not perfect like destructuring. It requires us to have nested code, and you still have to break things down if you want to have values as standalone variables. Scrolling down, you'll see the register block type function being called. It works just like before. You pass in a name and an object with the settings. The properties are all the same. In this example, the title, icon, and category settings are pretty straightforward. The edit and save functions require that you return the code to render. However, this time, JSX isn't being used. Remember, JSX is JavaScript, not HTML. The code that you see here is what Webpack turns JSX into. To create elements, you need to use the wp.element.createElement function. The example here shortens it to EL. The createElement functions works the exact same way the react.createElement function does. The first parameter is the element name followed by an object with the attributes to add. The last parameter is the content inside. Right now, things are simple. It's just a paragraph element with some text and stylings applied. Let's look at a more complex example. Go back to the examples and select the recipe card block. Everything is basically the same as before. Let's skip to the edit function. There's a crazy amount of nesting going on here. If you want to have an element inside of another element, then you'll need to call the createElement function inside of the third parameter of the parent element. Basically, you're trying to write HTML with JavaScript. It isn't too fun, which is why I don't recommend it, especially if you're trying to create something complex. If you're just creating a static block, then this approach is fine. This is why I taught you the ES6 approach. While it does take some time to set up, once you have it set up, then you can forget about it and work on your project. That's basically it when it comes to working with ES5 blocks. The only real difference is how you load in variables and create elements. The rest of the settings and attributes work the same as before. If it's alright with you, we'll continue using ES6 for the rest of our blocks.